In the wood processing industry, especially in veneer production, the log cutting process is considered one of the most important initial steps. This is a preparatory stage that plays a decisive role in both productivity and the quality of the finished veneer sheets. In small and medium-sized factories, log cutting is still mostly done manually, combined with simple mechanical equipment. This is a typical image of a traditional craft that still preserves manual labor techniques amidst the modern world of machinery. At the factory site, logs transported from plantations are stacked in large piles. The most commonly used materials are plantation-grown trees, typically small-sized woods like acacia, which are easy to handle and suitable for veneer production. Once delivered, these logs await their turn to enter the processing line. The very first step is to cut the logs into shorter sections, creating standard-sized logs ready for the peeling stage later. The cutting process takes place outdoors, on large concrete yards, providing enough space for stacking, moving, and handling the wood. The main equipment used for this process is a manual circular saw machine, powered by an electric motor. This machine is quite simple in structure, consisting of a motor, a belt transmission system, a rotating shaft, and a large circular saw blade. When the motor runs, the blade spins at high speed, ready to cut through even the hardest logs. The log cutting process is carried out entirely by hand. The operator manually feeds each log into the correct position, adjusts it carefully, and then slowly pushes it toward the spinning saw blade. Throughout the cutting process, the worker must hold the log firmly while closely observing the cutting line to ensure the log is cut to the correct standard length. This work demands high concentration, as even a small mistake can lead to dangerous workplace accidents. To assist the saw operator, there is usually another worker standing opposite the machine, working in tandem. This assistant helps stabilize the log as it feeds into the saw and pulls the cut log away from the saw blade area. The smooth coordination between the two workers ensures that the cutting process runs quickly and safely. Elsewhere around the cutting area, other workers are in charge of moving the logs. Whole logs are manually carried to the cutting area. Some logs that are too large or have excessive branches are pre-processed using chainsaws to trim unnecessary parts before being fed into the main saw. One notable aspect of this process is sawdust collection. To gather sawdust efficiently, workers typically spread a large tarp beneath the saw machine. As logs are cut, the sawdust falls onto the tarp, making it easy to collect after each shift. This sawdust is not wasted. It is often reused as fuel or as raw material for producing wood pellets, a form of eco-friendly biofuel. Although seemingly simple, the cutting stage plays a vital role. If the logs are not cut accurately, either too long or too short, it will cause difficulties during the veneer peeling stage. Logs that are too long may not fit the peeling machines, while logs that are too short result in material waste. Therefore, precision in each cut is essential, affecting the entire downstream production line. Once cut into standard-sized logs, they are moved to the debarking area, and then sent into the peeling machines to create thin veneer sheets, typically around 1.5 mm to 2 mm thick. These veneer sheets are later dried and pressed into finished plywood or other wood-based products. In small-scale processing workshops, production still relies heavily on manual labor. While simple machines provide assistance, human workers remain the core factor determining productivity. The image of workers with calloused hands and sawdust-covered shoulders, working tirelessly beside aging machines, reflects the authentic spirit of traditional craftsmanship. Log cutting is not merely operating a machine. It is a skill, a trade where workers accumulate experience and techniques over years of practice. Each log fed into the machine differs in size, shape, and hardness, requiring flexible handling that cannot be entirely automated. This process embodies the essence of manual, traditional craftsmanship in the wood industry. It showcases the skill of workers and the beauty of honest labor, where humans combine strength and basic machines to create value from raw logs. At the end of the cutting process, neatly stacked logs are ready for the next stage. This marks the beginning of the journey for veneer sheets, which will later appear in construction materials, furniture, or perhaps even as parts of tabletops and doors in everyday homes. Behind the simple wooden products we use daily lies a long production process full of sweat and hard work like this.
cái body này. Craftsmanship.